Something that I have been struggling with for a while and going back and forth.
For decades, Sara Gilbert has been a familiar and reassuring presence on television. From her early rise to fame to her reputation as one of Hollywood's most thoughtful and intelligent voices, she built a career defined by consistency rather than chaos. Unlike many child stars, Sara appeared to navigate fame with quiet strength, avoiding scandal while steadily shaping her own path behind the scenes. But recent developments surrounding Sara Gilbert have left fans deeply concerned. The latest details emerging about her personal and professional life paint a far more somber picture than anyone expected. What once looked like stability has slowly given way to emotional strain, difficult transitions, and challenges that can't be hidden behind success or public smiles. Those close to Sara suggest that the heartbreak isn't tied to a single event, but to a series of changes that have unfolded over time. Career shifts, personal sacrifices, and the pressure of maintaining balance in an unforgiving industry have taken a visible toll. While she has always valued privacy, the weight she's been carrying has become harder to ignore. What makes this story especially painful is how relatable it feels. Sara Gilbert's struggles aren't sensational or dramatic, they're quiet, human, and deeply emotional. They reflect the cost of long-term responsibility, the burden of expectations, and the exhaustion that comes from always being the steady one. In this video, we'll take a closer look at what's really going on with Sara Gilbert, why fans are calling the latest updates heartbreaking, and how a woman known for strength is facing one of the most difficult chapters of her life. Sara Gilbert's journey in Hollywood began at an age when most children are still figuring out who they are. By the time audiences truly noticed her on television, she already carried a level of emotional awareness that set her apart from other young actors. While many child stars were pushed into exaggerated roles or chaotic fame, Sara quietly built a reputation for intelligence, restraint, and self-control. From the outside, her career looked unusually stable, and for a long time, it was. Her breakout success on a hit sitcom didn't just make her famous. It defined her public identity. Sara became known as the thoughtful one, the grounded presence amid louder personalities. But what viewers rarely saw was the pressure that came with being the responsible one from such a young age. That role followed her for decades, shaping how people expected her to behave, speak, and even feel. Unlike many actors who chase constant spotlight, Sara made deliberate choices to step back when she needed to. She pursued education, worked behind the scenes, and slowly transitioned into producing and creative leadership. On paper, this looked like empowerment. In reality, it also meant carrying more responsibility, more pressure, and fewer places to hide. Success behind the camera comes with isolation, and Sara embraced it quietly. As years passed, subtle changes became noticeable. Fans observed that her appearances grew more reserved, her interviews more reflective. She spoke less about ambition and more about balance. Industry insiders noted that she was carrying enormous workloads while trying to protect her private life. The energy that once felt calm began to feel heavy. Part of that weight came from navigating personal identity in an industry that thrives on labels. Sara has always been open about living authentically, but openness doesn't erase difficulty. Being true to oneself in Hollywood often means constant scrutiny, misinterpretation, and pressure to represent more than just your own life. Over time, that expectation can become emotionally exhausting. Career shifts also played a major role. Stepping away from long-running projects is never easy, especially when those projects are tied to public nostalgia. When Sara made decisions that surprised fans, reactions were intense. Some praised her honesty, others criticized her choices, and many demanded explanations she never owed. That public tug-of-war added another layer of strain. What makes the situation heartbreaking is that none of this unfolded with scandal or spectacle. There was no dramatic collapse, no single headline moment. Instead, there was a slow accumulation of emotional fatigue. Friends and colleagues have described Sara as deeply thoughtful but increasingly guarded, someone who gives a great deal while keeping her own struggles private. The entertainment industry often celebrates reinvention, but rarely talks about the cost of endurance. Sara Gilbert didn't burn out loudly. She carried on quietly, fulfilling roles, supporting others, and maintaining professionalism even when the personal toll grew heavier. That kind of strength is rarely rewarded with rest. Fans who have followed her career from the beginning now sense that something has changed. Not in her integrity or talent, but in the weight she carries. The latest conversations surrounding Sara Gilbert aren't about failure. They're about emotional wear, difficult transitions, and the reality that even the strongest figures can reach a breaking point. And this is only the beginning of the story. Because behind the public calm lies a deeper truth about the sacrifices she made, the losses she absorbed, and the personal battles she never turned into headlines. As Sara Gilbert moved further into adulthood, the quiet strength that once protected her began to take on a different meaning. What had helped her survive early fame slowly became a shield she could not easily put down. Those close to her have described this period as one of deep reflection but also growing emotional isolation. Success had given her control, yet it also narrowed the space where she could be vulnerable. Much of this shift became visible through her changing relationship with work. Sara increasingly chose projects that kept her behind the camera rather than in front of it. Producing and creative leadership allowed her to shape stories, without exposing herself emotionally in the same way acting did. While this move was praised as smart and empowering, it also distanced her from the connection she once had with audiences. The applause faded, replaced by pressure that came with decision-making and accountability. At the same time, Sara was navigating complex personal responsibilities. Balancing career ambition with family life is challenging for anyone, but doing so under public scrutiny adds an extra layer of stress. Every decision, whether to step back, return, or change direction, was analyzed by fans and media alike. What should have been private moments of adjustment became topics of public debate. The heartbreak many fans now sense is rooted in this long stretch of emotional labor. Sara has often spoken about the importance of honesty and mental well-being, yet practicing those values in real life is rarely simple. Choosing self-preservation can look like withdrawal to the outside world. Silence can be mistaken for detachment. In reality, it can be a form of survival. Another painful aspect has been the changing dynamics of long-standing professional relationships. Working for decades with the same people creates deep bonds, but it also brings unresolved tensions and emotional baggage. When Sara made difficult decisions about her future, not everyone understood or accepted them. Letting go of familiar environments, even unhealthy ones, carries its own kind of grief. Industry expectations also played a role. As a woman known for intelligence and restraint, Sara was often expected to be the voice of reason, the stabilizer, the one who never faltered. That label left little room for her to struggle publicly. When exhaustion or doubt appeared, it was quietly absorbed rather than expressed. Over time, that internalization takes a toll. What makes recent updates especially heartbreaking is that they reveal how much of this weight Sara has been carrying alone. Her reduced public presence, fewer interviews, and selective appearances suggest someone prioritizing emotional safety over visibility. While this choice reflects strength, it also hints at how much she needed distance to heal. Fans who grew up watching her now recognize that her journey mirrors something deeply human. It's the story of someone who gave more than she took, who stayed composed while navigating constant transition, and who eventually reached a point where stepping back became necessary. There is sadness in that realization, but also respect. Sara Gilbert's story at this stage isn't about disappearance. It's about boundaries. It's about choosing peace over performance even when that choice disappoints others. And while that decision may look quiet from the outside, it represents one of the hardest acts in a career built on endurance. Yet the most painful truths have not fully surfaced. Because behind her withdrawal lies a deeper reckoning, one involving identity, loss, and the emotional cost of always being strong. As time passed, it became clear that Sara Gilbert's struggles were not rooted in a single setback, but in a quiet accumulation of emotional losses. These were not losses that made headlines, but ones that slowly reshape a person from the inside. For someone who had spent most of her life being composed and dependable, the weight of those losses became increasingly difficult to carry in silence. One of the most significant challenges Sara faced was the emotional cost of long-term visibility. Growing up in front of cameras leaves little room to evolve privately. Every change in demeanor, appearance, or outlook is noticed, questioned, and interpreted. For Sara, who valued privacy and depth, this constant observation created an internal conflict between authenticity and self-protection. Being seen did not always mean being understood. Another layer of heartbreak came from navigating transitions that marked the end of eras. Saying goodbye to roles and environments that shaped her identity meant confronting grief few people talk about. Those spaces weren't just jobs, they were chapters of her life, filled with memories, relationships, and versions of herself that could never be revisited. Letting go of them required emotional strength that often goes unrecognized. Sara also faced the challenge of redefining success. Early fame teaches performers that visibility equals worth. But as her priorities shifted, Sara questioned that equation. Choosing emotional well-being over constant exposure can feel like failure in an industry obsessed with momentum. Even when the decision is healthy, it carries doubt, guilt, and a sense of loss that there is also the quiet heartbreak of being misunderstood. Sara's reserved nature has often been mistaken for distance or disengagement. In reality, those closest to her describe someone deeply reflective and emotionally present. But public narratives rarely capture nuance. Over time, being misread can erode the desire to explain oneself at all. What resonates most with fans is how relatable her journey has become. Many people reach a point where the roles they've played at work, in family, and public no longer fit. Letting go of those roles is painful, especially when others expect you to keep performing them. Sara's experience reflects that universal struggle in an amplified, public form. Despite everything, Sara has never portrayed herself as a victim. She has spoken carefully, choosing words that reflect responsibility rather than blame. That restraint, while admirable, also means much of her pain remains unspoken. The heartbreak lies not in what she has said, but in what she has carried without saying. Recent observations suggest someone in a period of recalibration. Fewer commitments, more intentional choices, and a clear prioritization of mental and emotional health. While this shift signals healing, it also confirms how much healing was needed. You don't step away unless staying has become too heavy. Sara Gilbert's story at this point is not one of collapse, but of reckoning. It's about facing the reality that strength has limits and that even the most composed individuals need space to breathe. The sadness fans feel comes from recognizing that the woman who once held everything together had to quietly set some things down, and yet there is still one more layer to this story, one that explains why these changes feel so final, and why those closest to her describe this chapter as the most difficult of all. At this stage in Sara Gilbert's life, the heartbreak many fans sense is not rooted in tragedy but in acceptance. Acceptance that certain chapters are over, that some versions of herself belong to the past, and that moving forward requires letting go of expectations she carried for decades. This is often the quietest form of grief and the hardest to explain. For years, Sara was known as the steady presence, the thinker, the one who never unraveled publicly. That identity became both her strength and her burden. When people depend on you to always be composed, there's little room to be human. Over time, living up to that image demands emotional sacrifice. What we are seeing now is the result of years spent being strong without pause. Those close to Sara described this period as one of deep internal change. Rather than chasing relevance or validation, she has turned inward, prioritizing meaning over momentum. This kind of shift often looks like withdrawal from the outside, but in reality it's a form of survival. Choosing peace over performance requires courage, especially in an industry that rewards visibility above all else. There is also heartbreak in how endings are perceived. When a public figure steps back, the narrative often assumes loss or failure. But in Sara's case, the truth is more complex. She has reached a point where continuing on the same path would require denying parts of herself she can no longer ignore. Walking away from familiar success, even temporarily, is never easy. It involves mourning what once was while making space for something unknown. What makes her story resonate is how universal it is. Many people reach a moment where they realize the life they built, while successful, no longer fits the person they've become. Letting go of that life feels like losing a part of yourself. Sara's journey mirrors that experience, magnified by fame and public expectation. Despite the sadness, there is also quiet hope. Stepping back does not mean disappearing. It means recalibrating. It means allowing healing to happen without an audience. Sara Gilbert has spent most of her life being available to others, viewers, collaborators, and expectations. Now, she appears to be choosing herself, the heartbreak fans feel comes from empathy, not alarm. It's the recognition that even those who seem unshackable reach a point where rest becomes necessary. There is no scandal here. No dramatic fall. Just a woman choosing honesty over endurance. In many ways, this chapter may be the most authentic of all. Free from constant performance, Sara has the opportunity to define her life on her own terms for the first time without pressure to explain or justify. That freedom comes at a cost, but it also offers healing. So when people say the latest on Sara Gilbert is just heartbreaking, what they're really responding to is truth. The truth that strength has limits, the truth that reinvention is painful, and the truth that choosing yourself can feel like loss before it feels like peace. And perhaps that's not an ending at all, but a beginning that simply doesn't need to be loud.